Let's jump right into it. Today, we're unpacking something almost all of us have felt, but very few of us actually understand. I'm talking about test anxiety. And in this explainer, we aren't just going to talk about having butterflies in your stomach. No, we're going to totally demystify test anxiety as a highly measurable physiological cascade. We'll look at the hard data to prove that this is a genuine psychophysiological state. It's not a personal failing, and it's definitely not just a bad attitude. I mean, think about it for a second. Why on earth does sitting perfectly still at a quiet desk, holding literally nothing but a number 2 pencil, suddenly make your body feel like it's fighting off a grizzly bear? It's kind of a wild paradox, right? We're triggering our body's ancient physical fight-or-flight survival response in a completely stationary, modern environment. And as we'll see, that mismatch has real, tangible consequences for our brains. Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to cover the scale of test anxiety, break down worry versus emotionality, dive into the biology of stress, connect physical arousal to academic performance, look at some evidence-based interventions, and finally, check out future research directions. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The scale of test anxiety.
If you have ever felt totally overwhelmed right before an exam, I really want to validate that for you right now, because you are definitely not alone. A massive 2025 systematic review looked at tens of thousands of students and found that a staggering 48% experience clinically meaningful levels of exam anxiety, almost half. This proves without a doubt that test anxiety is a massive systemic issue on university campuses everywhere. It's not just a few unprepared students. And when we dig into those numbers a bit more, we can really see who's impacted. The data shows roughly 55% of female students and 48% of male students report significant test anxiety. To put that into perspective, general, everyday campus anxiety usually hovers around 40%. So the specific stress of being evaluated pushes those numbers way, way higher.
Section 2. Worry versus emotionality.
So modern psychology doesn't just treat test anxiety as one big blob of nervousness. It actually splits it into two completely distinct dimensions: worry and emotionality. Emotionality is the physical stuff, the racing heart, the sweaty palms, feeling sick to your stomach. But worry? That's the cognitive side, the intrusive, looping thoughts about failing or comparing yourself to the person sitting next to you. And here is the kicker. Research shows that the worry part is what actually hurts your grades the most. Why? Because those intrusive thoughts are literally competing for the limited working memory you desperately need to take the test. Your brain just doesn't have the bandwidth to spiral into panic and solve complex equations at the same time.
Section 3. The biology of stress.
All right, so what is physically happening under the hood? We're looking at a chain reaction that ends with the HPA axis cascade, and it all starts in your mind with a threat appraisal. Basically, you look at the test and your brain screams, danger. Instantly, your hypothalamus releases a hormone called CRH. That tells your pituitary gland to shoot ACTH into your bloodstream, which finally hits your adrenal cortex, making it pump out cortisol, our main stress hormone. Literally just thinking an exam is a threat unleashes this massive hormonal flood throughout your entire body. Now, a quick pre-test spike, what we call acute activation, is actually a good thing. It gives you energy, it preps you. The real trouble starts with chronic activation. Think about demanding multi-year postgraduate programs where you're constantly being evaluated. The stress switch just never flips off. This prolonged distress dysregulates your system, blunts your natural cortisol rhythms, and ultimately wrecks your memory retrieval. You can literally burn out your brain's ability to recall what you studied.
Section 4. Arousal and performance.
So how does all this physical activation actually mess with our brains when we're sitting in the exam hall? Well, we can look at a classic rule from way back in 1908 called the Yerkes-Dodson law. Picture an upside-down U on a graph. It tells us that a little bit of arousal, feeling just a tiny bit nervous, actually improves your performance. It keeps you sharp and focused. But hit that tipping point into the high clinical range worry we just talked about, your performance falls right off a cliff. But here's the crucial point. Not all tasks are affected the same way. If you're doing something simple or highly rehearsed, you can power through a ton of anxiety and still do fine. But complex tasks that demand a lot of working memory, like advanced math or problem-based graduate exams, are super vulnerable. Performance on those drops sharply even at lower levels of stress. The harder you have to think, the more devastating the anxiety is to your outcome. But wait, what if you are completely overwhelmed, but you still manage to pull an A? This brings us to a massive aha moment in the research: processing efficiency versus performance effectiveness. A lot of anxious students maintain their grades, meaning their performance effectiveness looks great on paper, but their processing efficiency totally tanks. To get that grade, they have to burn an exhausting amount of extra mental energy just to push through the panic. It creates a massive hidden tax of burnout that a straight-A transcript completely ignores. Across decades of studies, researchers consistently find a negative correlation between test anxiety and university performance, sitting right at an R value of negative 0.27. Now, mathematically, that might sound kind of modest, right? But scale that up to the whole population, and it's huge. For students hovering right on the edge of a passing grade or a licensing cutoff, this invisible anxiety tax is often the exact thing that tips them from passing into failing.
Section 5. Evidence-based interventions.
Okay, time for some good news. Because this is a biological, measurable process, it is highly treatable. The research points to a few slam-dunk interventions. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, directly tackles that intrusive worry. Relaxation techniques, like deep breathing, specifically calm down the physical emotionality. We also see awesome results from study skills training and exposure therapy, like taking practice tests until your body gets bored of the stress. But the absolute best results? They come from multi-component programs that mix all of these together. And the proof is right there in the data. Across 44 randomized trials, these interventions fundamentally work. They trigger a huge reduction in anxiety with an effect size of negative 0.76 and a solid measurable boost in actual academic performance. You don't just feel calmer, your grades genuinely go up when you treat the anxiety. And guys, this isn't just in your head. Research shows that psychotherapy physically normalizes your HPA axis biomarkers and your cortisol reactivity. Just let that sink in for a second. By using talking therapies and behavioral tricks, you are literally rewiring your endocrine system's hormonal response to stress. You are training your body to stop treating a written exam like a grizzly bear. Section 6. Future research directions. Even though the current research is amazing, there's always room to grow, like dealing with noisy cortisol measurements. The future here is so cool, though. Researchers want to do long-term tracking of the HPA axis across entire multi-year grad programs to really map out chronic burnout. And there's a huge push for using wearables like smartwatches to track real-time physiological stress right there in the exam room instead of just relying on lab tests or post-exam surveys. Which brings us to our final thought. Now that we know test anxiety is a deeply physical, hormonally driven, and highly treatable condition, how will you rethink evaluative stress? Whether you're a student, an educator, or an entire institution, I think it's time we stop treating exam panic as an attitude problem and start treating it as the genuine, modifiable psychophysiological state that it actually is. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.